You are listening to Creativity in Healthcare, hosted by Dr. Matthew J. Taylor, editor of the textbook Fostering Creativity in Rehabilitation. In this podcast, we explore creativity as it relates to how you can foster your own creativity and that of your related healthcare organizations. Healthcare reform hasn't happened yet, but working together, let's explore how we can nurture the next new growth in healthcare delivery.
So welcome to Creativity in Healthcare. I'm Matt Taylor, your host today, and I'm really excited about bringing you show number 5 because this is something completely different than our first 4 shows. And today we're going to welcome in Farzad Eskafi, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sparcit. And Sparcit's a really interesting concept, and I can't wait to get into this discussion with him. But to kind of give you just a bit of background, Farzad got his Bachelor of Science in both computer science and electrical engineering. So one of those pocket pencil guy.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, proud of it, right? What I'd like to do is we're going to look at how you guys at Sparcit are certainly doing the pioneering work in both measuring and enhancing creativity in organizations. But before we do that, would you mind giving us some context of, how you grew up, where you grew up, what influenced you to kind of bring you to where you are right now, so our listeners get a sense of that for a second?
Absolutely, yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me on your show. Definitely appreciate the opportunity. So just to answer your question, I grew up in Iran, in Middle East. I came here when I was 15 years old. Went to high school here, then I went to college. Then pretty much I spent most of my career in the startup world. My whole corporate life is about 9 months long. So not that long at all. I enjoy the startup life. I definitely enjoy it. Had my first startup when I was pretty young. When I was 17. I even had a company when I was in college, an online tutoring company at that time. So education was always an interesting, thing for me since pretty much high school and college time. And about 2 years ago, I was wondering, what more can we do in education? And I was looking for a concept. I was looking for an idea that I can build that has, one, a very sound research behind it, and 2, it can be scaled, not just in the US, but it can possibly be scaled around the globe if needed. So these were the my 2 main criteria that I had at that time. Mm-hmm. And there are different options. There were different ideas at that time. And creativity and innovation was one of those things that kept popping up. But as I looked into the market and as I was doing the research around it, there was not much around it. People just talked about it, but there was no benchmark for it. There was no, there was not much product out there. Yeah, there are consultants in the field, there are innovators in the fields that would, teach things about it. But again, it was all, more like a one-on-one or, small group sort of a setting. And I was like, okay, how do we expand this? What do we do?
Sure.
With creativity? So, I started reading research papers. I went to academia. I read research papers from, you name it, from neuroscientists, from psychologists, from some philosophers, including some of Aristotle's work. I actually read some of those work.
Oh, great, yeah.
Just to see what this is about. There are some folks in the religion space that talk about creativity, and they have an interesting, fact about it. But so that at the end of the day, we came up with this model of semantic-based psychometric modeling that one's creativity, and I should say one's creative thinking abilities, can not only be measured, but it can also be improved over time.
Oh, okay.
And I say abilities, I don't say personalities, because yes, abilities can go up and down depending if you train yourself or not. Whereas in theory, at least, personalities don't change.
Right.
It might change a little bit, but it doesn't really change over time. And that's what we were looking for. So then, the research started in this project. I read quite a number of papers from a psychological perspective. I should give some credit to J.P. Guilford and, Ellis Paul Torrance.
Sure.
They're both long gone, of course, but they were professors of psychology. And they came up with the first, in my mind, of course, the first psychometric or stable psychometric model that one's creative thinking abilities can be measured.
Right.
Now, should I go into the details of the indices or?
Well, yeah. And so again, our listeners are primarily in healthcare. Mm-hmm. And of course, in healthcare, it's all about standardization, best practice, have it be grounded in that. And, the local vitamin guy says he's got all the research for his algae wonder supplement or whatever, but give us just a glimpse of what it took, because your business was partially funded by the National Science Foundation, right? So I mean, Absolutely. We're not talking about you kind of got a good idea, right? So kind of just give us a little glimpse of what that process ended up being for you guys.
Okay, that was an interesting process by itself. I mean, I needed funding. I mean, we hired some top-notch researchers in the field, and those guys wouldn't work for a coffee. Unfortunately, I tried, but they wouldn't work for a coffee. So I wanted to get paid, and no venture cap or no angel, would fund us. They're like, This is a research project. What you're doing right now is almost a basic science, and we're not going to fund basic science. We're going to fund commercialization and expansion. So we went to National Science Foundation. We said, hey, guys, we have this idea. It's quite sound idea. There is a research behind it that we want to build an engine around it to automate this process. Right. And the first proposal, we wrote it. I spent quite a number of hours on it, and it got rejected.
Sure.
It was like, oh well, no, it's not possible. You cannot do this. No, but there is a research behind it that in theory I can do it. So after a couple of conversations, with some folks at National Science Foundation, another round of proposal writing, we eventually got the first round of funding from National Science Foundation to go ahead and build this product. And again, the product was, how do you build a scalable creative thinking assessment model? That was really the project. That can be, again.
And for our non-techie healthcare people, scalable means what?
It means anybody around the world can potentially use it.
Okay. Yeah. So
you're not constrained by environment. You're not constrained by people or so. Anybody around the world should be able to use it.
Good. I just wanted to make sure we weren't losing people on what the scalable part was. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yes.
And so in describing it on the website and that, you talk about the kind of the four criteria, right? The utility, the diversity, the sustainability. How do those kind of fit as far as delivering your product? What are those aspects of creativity? Because again, most of our listeners, this thing of creativity is a new thing. So why do you list those and originality? Well, I guess actually I read that wrong. You have fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. So
Absolutely.
Read my follow-up questions.
No. Yeah. So good question. I mean, those are the dimensions or the abilities of a creative person. Those are what those really abilities are. And again, there is quite a bit of research behind it by psychologists in the field. Guilford and Torrance started it about 50 years ago or so, and academia started building on it. What those really means, and let me just give you a quick example of what those means. I mean, fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. Fluency is like this. If I give you a task to do, fluency is like how many different ways can you come up with a possible solution for that task? That's fluency of an individual. The more number of ways you can come up with a solution, the more higher fluency score is going to be.
Okay.
Flexibility is more like this. I'm going to look at the pool of responses, all the responses you gave me. What are the different categories of responses? In other words, did you give categories all in the same? Did you give responses all in the same category, or did you diverge into different categories? Okay. That's flexibility of an individual. An adaptable person, for example, would have a high flexibility score because they have
to move through the categories. Yeah.
Exactly, and they would jump around between categories.
Right.
originality literally means statistical infrequency of your responses. How unique is your response? How far is your response from the original, item or the original prompt that was given to you?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's a threshold. Once you go past that threshold, your response becomes irrelevant. If you randomly type on a keyboard, hey, that's not an original response. It's an nonsense response. And elaboration means literally every single response that you give. How elaborative were you? Did you just give a one-word answer, or did you elaborate on it? You explained what your response really means. That's elaboration.
Be able to fit that original part into the context of whatever the situation is, so
exactly
others can make use of it. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Now, the cool thing is this, though. We've done over 30,000 assessments so far. We don't have an individual. We haven't seen an individual that has high scores in all abilities. Usually you're good at one or two of them and you're lacking the other ones. And we've seen that quite frequently. I myself, I have a pretty flexible, high flexibility score. I can jump around different ideas or different tasks or so. And, my co-founder, for example, my originality is pretty low, just to let you guys know. I don't come up with the most original ideas or so. My co-founder is like opposite of me. Very high originality score, come up with the most. He wrote the patent for our company and, everything.
Right.
Very high originality. He's a very original person, but his flexibility is not as high as mine. So, I think we're a good team, when it comes to that perspective.
Right. So, it would seem like, like you said, everybody was kind of talking about creativity and, there were some consultants and that sort of thing. So, in this time where everything's so fluid, changing so quickly, what they kind of call the post-normal times, nothing's the normal way we thought it was going to be, right? And what for companies or, say I'm a small healthcare delivery group or a clinic or a hospital owner or something, what's this creativity going to do for me? Isn't it just going to confuse everything and have everybody run around?
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully not. Don't get me wrong. You need processes in place. Completely become a creative person and completely forget about processes. There is a process for a creative person. In fact, creative people, it's not like you just go in a park and come up with, ideas.
Right.
They're very focused people in what they do. Yeah. There's this whole aha moment that, people talk about. And that aha moment doesn't just come to people. Like, people are incubating about the idea. They're thinking about it for a while. And eventually, oh, wow, if I do this, I can, it might work.
Yeah, it's kind of the myth of the light bulb, the lone genius, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly. But so there's a whole process that people go through in healthcare, even very similar thing. They're cutting the costs down on it. The resources are more limited. Believe it or not, in most other sectors, customer service is a big deal. In healthcare, in my opinion, at least what I've seen, is not the top-notch factor yet.
Right.
And slowly consumers are demanding it. They're like, we want the same customer service that we are getting when we call up an e-commerce company or so from the healthcare organizations.
Actually, hospitality.
If I come exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We want hospitality.
Yeah.
We have a great partner in UK, Blue Green Learning, and we collaborate, for example, with them quite closely on providing our services to healthcare groups in the UK specifically in this case.
Okay.
And Rob Sheffer is a co-founder of the company, and he even told me that leadership is becoming even more important in healthcare organizations.
Sure. Yeah.
Quite a bit. And the leaders are the ones that must be pushing this creative thinking, innovation thinking in their organizations.
Mm-hmm.
They should push their own people, or maybe encourage their own people, that we want new ways of doing it. We want to improve the ways that we are doing it, especially in healthcare. And again, Rob's focus is primarily on the healthcares, in the UK.
So do you when you collaborate with them, you guys do the measurement and then they have the learning ability enhancement model? Is that
absolutely? Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Rob does his workshops, very effective workshops that he does. And a lot of times, we do the assessment part, we do a pre and a post so that you can show that his training is actually working. People are becoming more flexible. People are becoming more original. Once they go through his training.
Yeah. So does he have a way then that an organization, besides just each individual scoring well, I mean, how do they capture like an outcome of, our patient survey went up or that kind of thing? How is that part of what they assess doing?
I'm sure Rob is doing that because he does follow up quite frequently with his clients on
Right.
that. And I mean, I'm talking about larger healthcare organizations that he collaborates with, like the CDC version of UK, for example.
Right. So big picture stuff too.
Yeah, because it's not that that there's process for everything, especially with those larger organizations. But hey, all of a sudden you get an Ebola. What are we gonna do?
We better be moving.
We better be fast, and we better be original and quick and creative and flexible soon. Not take our time with some process that we have to go through necessarily.
That's right. Yeah. And so when we first spoke, actually a couple things. One, for our listeners, I'll get Rob's contact, his organization's contact. So we'll put that in our show notes too, as well as, of course, your site. But when we were talking about it, you had some interesting perspectives because you're looking scalable across the connected universe. Quite a contrast between different cultural ways of approaching this, and particularly you said as far as labor laws and that. So, I would imagine most of our listeners initially are going to be in the U.S. here, and you're mentioning that it was quite restrictive. So, kind of talk about the cultural thing, and then what within our U.S. restriction, how are people using this other than as an employee screening tool kind of thing?
Good question. So I think U.S. and South Africa have the highest regulations when it comes to hiring practices.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are definitely strict protocols that the U.S. employers have to follow. It doesn't mean that if you have a job, if you have a specific position that requires one to be creative, you cannot use our tool and our assessment.
Oh, okay.
But again, you have to be able to defend it. That's really the key thing. If you want to hire a leadership position, I mean, you can definitely run any kind of assessment on that person,
right.
Because that person if that person is a wrong person, it could be really bad.
Right.
So definitely, there are ways you can defend it easily.
I see.
So it's not just you cannot use it at all for selection. It's just you have to be able to defend it as needed. For training purposes, once the employee is in, you can definitely run them quite easily. I mean, we have folks that use us for their high potential employees. They want to train them to become the next leaders in their organizations. We have folks that, within the L&D, the learning and development group in organizations that are using us, for additional training for their own employees.
Okay.
As needed. But yeah, I mean, it's just the U.S. and South Africa's law are definitely, as far as I know, the hardest two that when it comes to hiring and selections.
Yeah, and are you seeing a difference then across cultures with obviously there are generalities, but I guess I would think in the U.S. we've kind of got our old staid corporate fixtures, and then we also have our fast runners and that sort of thing. What do you see when you look at some of the other big countries where you guys are doing work right now?
Absolutely. I mean, we've run our assessment in 161 countries around the world.
Okay.
There are 163 countries total, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll be honest with you. In some of the countries, we only have a couple of participants. So I hope we had thousands, even millions in all countries, but unfortunately we're not there yet.
Oh, sure.
But no, you definitely see differences in some countries. In the US, in fact, I can elaborate on it a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
We've gathered our data, we went to the World Bank, and we categorized the countries based on the World Bank categorization, first, second, and third world countries.
I see.
And you definitely see patterns. You see, for example, believe it or not, when it comes to originality, you don't see that much of a significant difference between first, second, and third world countries. People do come up with original responses in all countries.
Sure. Uh-huh.
In first world countries, they are definitely more flexible. They definitely can look at a problem from different angles a lot easier than folks in second or third world countries. So we definitely have seen a pattern.
So the
Like
constraint of resources and that can kind of limit them, you think? Is that what that is? Or
I think it's to some extent it's the culture as well. I mean, they do not necessarily, they may not necessarily have the freedom to be as flexible as they want to.
sure.
Yeah. I mean, I want to just go one step further. Like flexibility is a key part of, a good entrepreneur.
Right.
Because entrepreneurs, you have to constantly change your way of doing it.
Sure.
Sometimes within the same day.
Yeah.
From morning to night, it changes. The way
Right.
that you have
Yeah. In this day. Yeah. Exactly.
especially in these days. So if you're not a flexible person, you probably should not be an entrepreneur. You're probably going to have a really hard time being an entrepreneur.
Right. Yeah. So that brings up something I wanted to describe then or ask you about is, so if someone or some team tests badly,
Mhm.
like you said, there is some capacity to tweak at least some parts of those categories, or then you also look at then finding team complementers that, like you said, between you and your co-founder, how you guys give a little balance to the formula.
Yeah. So I mean, you definitely want to have a diverse team. I mean, you want to have at least a person with a high flexibility and high originality and high or elaboration on your team.
Mhm.
It's good to have that because it definitely, each of those people look at a problem from different angles, which is great.
Right.
There are ways that one's creative thinking abilities can improve. I mean, it's not your IQ, it's not your personality that you can just say it's set in stone.
Right.
And if you practice it, if there are certain exercises that they can give to participants, that if you do these exercises regularly or so, your CQ score, your creativity quotient can improve over time.
Right.
We did a study with Stony Buffalo on that we showed that. Folks went to a training course, a 5-week training course. We did a pre and a post assessment, and we showed improvements for the folks that actually went through the full training and did the exercises and did the homeworks and so it can definitely improve.
Okay, so that's encouraging, because a lot of healthcare people have been just taught to put the blinders on and do what you're told, and just because of safety protocols and that too. But as our patients become more complex, our resources get constrained. We've got to have this ability to move, and so there is hope for us non-creatives too, right? Or at least get partnered with somebody that can support us.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
I don't even think that folks in healthcare are uncreative. I think they're very creative with the resources that they have. They can become very flexible. Especially the researchers in health, they come up with the weirdest things. Solve. So definitely, there are some very creative folks in the healthcare for sure.
Yeah. And so this is one point that I've seen in some of the stuff I've read about creativity and that's kind of the difference between creativity and innovation. So, like the plumbers in Auschwitz, Poland, were innovative in the shower heads they designed, but there is also an ethical issue that might not call that so much creative. Have you come across that or seen that in any of the readings you did, or about the idea that if it's truly creative from a kind of a bigger picture, and health is certainly part of it, does it support diversity? Does it support choices? Anything like that? Or
just this morning, I wrote a blog post called "The Dark Side of Creativity." Just this morning.
Oh, did you?
So, yeah, and there are some studies that people, with a higher creative thinking abilities, they tend to bend the rules a bit more as well.
Oh, okay.
I guess it comes with the territory.
Sure, yeah. How do we get around this barrier, right?
Exactly. How do I get around this barrier? How do I do that? How do I do that? How do I? Yeah. So it doesn't mean there are illegal, but it means that some of them are bending the rules quite a bit to get to where they want to be.
Right.
Creativity, in my opinion, is a subset of innovation. And innovation is a whole process for a whole company or for a whole group. Whereas creativity is more like a person's ability. You have to be creative to be an innovative person.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, creativity is a person, and innovation is the product that comes out, or the tool or the process that comes out eventually.
Yeah, because we're seeing that in healthcare. We've got the electronic medical records, which were a process and a technology application. But what we're seeing then is that now the providers don't necessarily make eye contact with their patients. The patients feel not heard, and so it's an innovation, but has it truly been creative if it's having a negative effect on the healing relationship? That's one of the things we look at in healthcare too, is it's a little more complicated because it's that interpersonal thing. So I look forward to, and I've got your blog will be in the show notes too, because I was reading through those, and those are outstanding.
Great, glad you guys like it.
Yeah, and now the other thing I was wondering, from my standpoint, how I like to see it as originally a physical therapist, and how we change in healthcare, and I noticed in your LinkedIn interests that ballroom dancing was one, which might initially sound kind of funny, but from a neuroplastic standpoint or a neurophysiological standpoint, when you put yourself in those kind of novel conditions where you have to adapt and change, we aren't compartmentalized, right? I mean, if we're shifting our brain network, it's going to shift for a whole bunch of different things, wouldn't you imagine?
So that's a good point. I mean, I kind of relate the two to some extent to each other, because ballroom itself is a very structured dance.
Right.
There are certain moves you can do. There are certain postures you have to keep to be a good ballroom dancer. They're pretty well defined.
Right.
But you actually think of those guys as very creative because they mix moves together. They move around in different way.
Yeah.
They partner up in a different way with your partner or so. So it's actually a team sport, because you and your partner are to some extent you become one person on the floor, and you have to be. I enjoyed it. I actually enjoy it quite a bit. It's a good stress reliever. It's very strict. You're very focused when you're on the dance floor.
Right. It brings that awareness to.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of the neat things we're seeing when we look at how the human nervous system changes, and just learning, both motor learning and, as you're saying, skill ability for creative tasks, and that more novel, the more interesting, the more not absolute intense, but has to be fairly intense and focused.
Absolutely.
The more the network shifts and changes, and we get not only how it fires differently, but new connections in it. And so it's I haven't seen anything in the literature about physical movement with creativity in that, but I think there's got to be something there, and it'd be fun.
That might be a good research project for us. So let me think about it. Let me see if I can convince some of my ballroom friends to do a study with it.
It would be fun. Yeah. And it's interesting because my wife and I failed badly. We tried a couple of years ago, but we both kind of wanted to be in charge, and didn't seem to work so good.
Okay. Yeah.
And I can't count time, so it was really ugly for her.
Got it. I mean, ballroom is part of it is, and I usually joke, people usually get nervous when they have to perform. The way that I think about it is that, hey, you're giving something to your audience. You're actually giving them something. You shouldn't be nervous when you give someone a gift. You're not nervous.
Yeah.
It's the same thing when you perform on a dance floor.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see. And so if you take a look I shared my textbook with you that I think it's in chapter 3. Chapter 3, I kind of go through some of that of what we understand as far as, because it also involves, when we look at creativity, it's sort of like, well, how do you measure love, or how do you measure, it's one of those hard things to get a handle on. But when we look at pain science, that's another crossover that our healthcare listeners would understand, because we're finally understanding that people who are in chronic pain can't keep making the same responses. They have to create something different. Okay, if they keep doing it, they'll just reinforce the loop, whatever loop they're stuck in, that's giving this output of pain. And so now we're understanding in rehab and rehabilitation that we have to work on the story the person's telling themselves. We have to work on the structure that they live in. We have to work on their relationships with other people, all of that. And so the focus is on the creativity of the therapist and the patient to be able to dance, to find a way out of this. Because if we keep, that's the reason the person's got the chronic condition, is because everything hasn't worked so far. And so that's one of the things I'm interested in, is how do we enhance clinical skills so that I'm not, if only I got one tool to, move your vertebrae this way or give you this prescription, I'm not going to be much use to a lot of people. And we can't afford that anymore. We had that luxury, but that's gone. So, and so I look forward to our follow-up conversations about, how we might measure that and look at those kind of things. Because I think it's going to be really critical from the healthcare industry that way too, as far as being able to put that together. So I'm wondering, kind of some fun follow-up closing kind of things to kind of wrap up this. What are you reading now, or what are you studying? What's probably 20 different things, right?
There are a lot of different things, yes. I'm reading anything from we definitely have great research partners in the field that we're coming up with different ways of improving one's creativity, and even different ways of measuring it. As needed. We want to go through like global creativity. We want to be able to allow this tool to be used by anyone on the planet. Literally, I mean it. If we have internet connectivity, you should be able to use it. We are doing a lot more studies on domain-based, on subject-based creativity. We want to be able to, to help people to become more creative in a given area, in a given subject.
Sure.
We have a great partner in Stony Buffalo State University in New York. Great professor of medicine, and she's trying to teach her student that, hey, creating new medicines is part art, part science. The science part is the easy part. The art part is the harder part.
Wow.
So we definitely are doing quite a bit of studies and research in that area to help people in different domains if needed.
Sure. Yeah. So she's teaching medical students, you say?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. I'll get that link to the.
Absolutely.
Because I think the schools are all clamoring for that too. How do we send our students out at this point to make them competitive? And as you're saying this is the day that the climate talks are starting in Paris, and I'd be interested to know what the creative capacity are of the people that are leading those dialogues, wouldn't you?
Me too. Yes. Maybe. Yeah.
Talk about big picture, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yes. That'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So what motivates you? What's your highest priority besides just being interested in education and creativity? What's the thing what do you want to see come forward with your work? What are you trying to deliver on a high purpose for you as a person? Why this fire?
Oh God. If we do this right, my name is going to be carved somewhere in the history.
Okay, so legacy, huh? That's great. Yeah.
Definitely like that. And I think it really, we are past the skill-based assessments. We are past, teach someone to do a certain job.
The industrial model, yeah.
Exactly. The industrial model is still going, but we are getting past that.
Sure.
We are getting to a creative model that we have to push ourselves. Humanity have to push themselves. We have different challenges than we had 5 years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
That we have to deal with right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And when like your homeland, the crazy dysfunctional geopolitical stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably still have family back there and everything else. And it's like, can't we get together?
Yeah. Exactly. I really hope that with not just our company, there are quite a number of large-scale training companies out there. we can train, like, let's not look at it from a country perspective. Let's look at it as a whole world perspective. How do we improve it over time? It's just one planet at the end of the day, honestly, unless we go to Mars. But hey,
yeah,
we're not there yet.
Sell NASA your product.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay. So this, you see this as being what you do for the next couple of years?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is your body, your corporation. It's not.
That is, yeah, and it's here to stay.
Yeah. Good. Oh, that's so exciting. So, anything else you had in mind we should have talked about that you'd like to share, or? Yeah,
progress. Progress. At the end of the day, I didn't want to just make another app that tells you what the time, what the time is of when to wake up or so. Right. It has to be, and I'm not even joking with you. I see so many. I'm so involved with the startup community and in entrepreneurship communities in all different sectors. And a lot of times I see them, making a new tool that's good, that is cute, that is good, but there is no innovation behind it. It's just a new tool, new way of doing something, or so. Uh-huh. Whereas no, I really push people that come up with something that could be very disruptive.
Right. So shifting paradigms. So
shift the paradigms. Not just like, okay, I'm going to build this app that the buttons look cuter. So instead of, if I press it, it's going to make a sound instead of not making a sound.
Yeah.
Like, like in healthcare, there's a lot of, a lot of progress that can be done, like disruptive progress that can be done. Mm-hmm. There's a home care that is coming up that has actually been going on for a long time. There was the monitoring, the outpatients, monitoring of the elderly parents, right? For example, that is becoming, kids like us, or people like us, we are constantly working. We have elderly parents, but we cannot do both at the same time.
Right.
So there could be a lot of innovation in that space that can be done. So I just want to keep, pushing people that, come up with, don't be scared to fail.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and
fail. Yeah. If you fail, just start something else and fail fast if you want to fail fast.
Fail fast. Yeah, that's right. Fail fast as inexpensively as you can, and then keep going. Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's true, and it's kind of interesting when we look at, I think as we swim in these modern waters, we kind of forget that it was only back in, I don't know, when was it, coming back from the moon the first time, and they took the picture of the Earth. That was the first time we saw ourselves as the small planet. We think, oh, we've always known that, but it's like really hasn't been that long. So there's a lot of good work for us to do, right?
Absolutely. Teach our kids to be better. Not just to follow in our footsteps.
Right.
I usually just say, my parents sometimes, my brother sometimes joke around with me that, hey, we are moving in our parents' footsteps. I'm like, no, I think we're already better than our parents. And we better be better than our parents, because otherwise they didn't do a good job in training us. Exactly. So push your kids too. Let them make mistakes. So exactly.
Oh, well, this has been great. Really appreciate you taking the time out. And like I said, in our show notes, we'll have the link to your website and your blog and that kind of thing. I encourage our listeners, if there are any kind of what size companies do you deal with? What Sparcit particularly?
We deal with all kinds of companies, from small innovation firms and consulting firms to larger ones. So we definitely collaborate with quite a number of variety of partners.
Yeah. So if we had a small like rehab facility with maybe a couple $1 million a year budget, would that be
absolutely?
Yeah. Okay. So I sometimes small is greater than 10 million or something.
Exactly. It's faster to move through.
Right. So, okay.
Faster to move through, faster to run a test, and faster to fail if it doesn't work. So definitely.
If you're smaller. So exactly. Well, thanks so much, Farzad. I really appreciate it. And we'll get this out in the next week, and then we'll start seeing if we can spark it across to make this little village we're living on a little better place, right?
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.